bug of today's GOP is where we start. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania is here. She served as a House manager during Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. Also joining us, former Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock is here. She yesterday accompanied Officer Brian Sicknick's family on those meetings and visits to Republican senators' offices on Capitol Hill. And Olivia Troy is here, former top aide to Vice President Mike Pence, now the director of the Republican Accountability Project. Boy, do we need that. Barbara Comstock, thank you for being here. I want to first hear about how Officer Sicknick's family is doing and what the case was that they made, and how did those senators vote no after hearing it?
Well, it was a tough day for them, but we did start out with Senator Romney, who, of course, was supportive, and that obviously was very helpful. And we ended our day with Senator Murkowski, who really talked to Gladys Sicknick, kind of mother to mother, and really apologized to her, saying, I'm sorry that you have to come to do this, what should be done anyway. And Gladys Sicknick said, she's not the kind of person who would want to come forward. She's usually in the background, but she just felt she couldn't be quiet anymore. But so she was very, strong in those meetings. It was tough, as was Brian Sicknick's partner, Sandra Gomez, and then two of the officers who were there that day on January 6th, Officer Dunn, who knew Brian well, and then Officer Michael Fanone, and they all made very strong cases about why this should not only be done for the officers and for everything they went through, front lines that continues to be minimized, but also for the country and for history, as Officer Dunn said. So I certainly agree with my friends Tom Ridge and Michael Chertoff and many of the other bipartisan efforts that said we need this commission. And as Susan Collins said, she's going to keep working on this. There actually were 7 Republican votes if Senator Toomey had been able to be there. So I think as more information comes out, it's going to become even more apparent the need for this. And I also would expect that members of Congress will start, I don't know why they haven't started subpoenaing things right now. I said on January 7th they should be subpoenaing Donald Trump's phone records from that day and earlier, the organizers of the rally, all of the people who were involved. You think about all of the texts and the messages that went back and forth to the White House on that day to do something. We need to have a very distinct timeline, and that can start today with existing committees, with the effort to then turn it over to a commission down the road.
So, Barbara, you seem to have just put your finger on what I think had as much to do with the rupture between Kevin McCarthy and Liz Cheney. When Liz Cheney started talking about the sorts of things you just talked about, she included Kevin McCarthy being subpoenaed to share what he knows. And it was at that point that he seemed to pull the rug out, not just from Liz Cheney in leadership, but from Congressman Katko, who he sent with the mission of negotiating a bill, which was exactly what Congressman Katko achieved. The Democrats yielded to everything, and it seemed like the dog caught the car. Kevin McCarthy panicked and then had Scalise whip votes against the legislation he told Katko to negotiate. What was going on behind the scenes? Is Kevin McCarthy scared?
Well, listen, John Katko was a great colleague of mine. We came in the same class together. He was a prosecutor. I knew him, in my Justice Department days, and he did negotiate a very good, bipartisan agreement there. That's why he got 35 Republicans under those difficult circumstances. But the issue here is the truth is going to come out eventually. It would be better for everyone to participate in the process. There are going to be records that are there that whether the Justice Department starts doing it or other investigative bodies, eventually it'll come out. And I think for the sake of the country and for our safety, and because of the threats we know that still exist, that are out there, you have state officials now being threatened. Officer Fanone and Officer Dunn are getting death threats just for speaking out and talking about what happened to them. Officer Fanone, some of the members we talked to yesterday didn't realize that Officer Fanone's assailant, the one who tased him in the back of his neck 12 times, had been already arrested. And he was a well-known Trump activist who had been active since 2016. His name was Daniel Rodriguez. There were 3 others that were also arrested in the connection with the brutal assault on Officer Fanone that almost killed him. He had a heart attack also and still has. So they were not familiar with that. They didn't know that this was a Trump activist from California. And, you know, he was someone talked about the deep state. He had been, you know, really in all of these, you know, dark, you know, on the internet talking about all of these conspiracy theories had really, you know, strongly took hold with him. And that's why he was here with other friends. So that has to all be looked at, and how that connects to this rally on January 6th and all the people who were communicating back and forth. And those facts exist and those records exist, and there's going to be nothing you can do about getting rid of them. So we might as well know sooner, because we know they're still out there attacking even Republicans. And actually, I should point out, Michael Fanone, Officer Fanone, and Brian Sicknick are Republicans. And that's something that Brian Sicknick's partner pointed out to the members yesterday. She said, she loved you. He loved you guys. He was a Republican. He voted for Donald Trump. And yet we're leaving these guys on the field instead of getting to the truth, as Lisa Murkowski said.
Congresswoman Dean, can you do what Barbara Comstock is suggesting? Can you subpoena records from the White House, the phone call records, at least get the times, at least start to put some of these pieces of evidence in place while we wait for some sort of commission to be formed, either by Speaker Pelosi if the bipartisan efforts fall apart, or I guess there's some history of the Watergate Select Committee was a select committee in the Senate. Is there more investigative work that can be done in the interim?
Yes, we can and we will. And of course, we have an administration that will not do what the previous administration did, which was block every subpoena, every attempt at oversight. But let me thank Congresswoman Comstock for her role, for her escorting Gladys Sicknick around yesterday in the Senate. How is it that Mrs. Sicknick's words, draped in her grief, fell on the deaf ears of senators? We needed only 10. We got 6. Too bad Senator Toomey, my own senator, wasn't there to vote yes. Where were 3 more? Where were all the others? Where were they in search of the truth? I'm furious with the Senate for leaving this woman, for requiring her to come to the Senate and then not heeding her words as she struggles through her grief. So yes, here in the House, we will do everything we possibly can. We will subpoena those who need to be subpoenaed. But the independent commission was the way to go. We don't need this to fall into party lines and narratives that become so poisonous. We need people who are not politically tied to take a look at what happened on January the 6th. Think about I was there, as you know, but for those who were not there, they're appalled. I have staff members furious today. They weren't there, but they actually say we have to learn the truth. I think a lot of Martin Luther King's words from the letter from Birmingham jail, which I used to teach in any writing course I ever taught over the course of 10 years. And what he said is, we have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of bad people, but for the appalling silence of good people. Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, your appalling silence, your appalling muzzling of the truth is shameful.
And Congresswoman, I mean, the reporting suggests it's more than their silence. I mean, they didn't stay silent and say, listen, vote your conscience, folks. They aggressively whipped support to kill it. I mean, this was killed by Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell. What do you think they're hiding?
What exactly? What are they afraid of? What are they hiding? Are they complicit in some way? Will we uncover, and ultimately, and Barbara Comstock is absolutely right, we'll get to the truth. The facts will be revealed. The truth will be revealed. They're afraid of the truth. They're defending nonsense, and we know that. And so what I hope is that the American public rejects their alternative facts or their silence. I was thinking back to, the very first set of press conferences under the previous administration. And you remember the person who came forward and said, well, maybe there are alternative facts. Sadly, the previous administration.
Kellyanne Conway, yeah.
Exactly. who was our State of the Union? I'm forgetting who it was. Your colleague who asked her those questions. And it was
Todd,
literally
yeah.
about
Yeah.
Todd, yes. It was literally about the crowd size. Remember how long ago that was and how nonsensical that seemed. To argue alternative facts as to that which is discoverable and known, it just was bizarre. But sadly, guess what? 4, 5 years later, we see those seeds were sown, and we sadly are reaping the seeds of falsehoods, of alternative facts, of people who cannot actually face the truth. What's the most dangerous part of this is if we don't get to the bottom of this, we suffer and risk this repeating itself, and perhaps in even worse fashion. This was the interruption of what is precious to us, the peaceful transfer of power. Imagine that those who were there, who were hunted on that day, who could have been killed but for the courageous acts of Officer Sicknick and every other Capitol Police officer, don't want to get to the truth. Shame on them.
You know, Olivia, the Congresswoman makes a really interesting point. I mean, this was all previewed for us by Sean Spicer, who I'll never forget watching it live, argued on that first day in an ill-fitting suit that the crowd size gathered for Donald Trump was actually larger than the crowd size gathered for former President Obama. And then I think Kellyanne Conway was the one who went on Chuck Todd's show and talked about alternative facts. The sad truth is that a lot of the Republican base believes that those are the real facts, and that shows like this are not the real facts. And what the Republican Party seems to have co-signed is they seem to have made official the break with reality. What Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy did, not just by staying silent, silence would have been an egregious approach to an attack on them, where the mission statement was hang Mike Pence. But Mike Pence's own brother voted against the commission. So I wonder what you do to sort of break through again with reality.
Right. Well, the actions of the Republicans in the Senate today are not only shameful, but they're dangerous, because what they're doing is that they're not going to allow the truth to be told to Americans. And that's what is needed really at this moment, where you're seeing the threat of domestic terrorism rise across our country. And you're seeing these groups, you saw these groups descend upon the U.S. Capitol. But these people are still out there. They're still talking to each other. They're still radicalizing. And they're radicalizing not really within themselves, so to speak, but they're radicalizing because the leaders of our country are feeding them these narratives repeatedly over and over. And it is shameful and it's horrifying to see the actions of McCarthy and McConnell, where they stand by and they allow this to happen, because what they're doing is that they're saying that they're okay with it. They're doing the seal of approval, and they're saying that the disinformation that they spread that led to this event on January 6th, they're going to continue to push, and they will continue to push it for months to come, and they'll try to sweep it under the rug. And I think that that's what makes an investigation still critical. It needs to happen. We need to get to the facts. We need to push out the truth about what led to this, the months before, what happened on that day, whatever dereliction of duty happened, which we saw in the Oval Office, but also with others that were involved. That's what is critical in whatever form. And it's unfortunate that it couldn't be bipartisan, because that would have been so much more effective in diffusing what we have right now, which is a pandemic of disinformation across this country on lies about an election that are just not true. And they're lies that are going to continue to go on, that are going to embolden these terrorist groups across the country.
Barbara Comstock, I want to come back to Kevin McCarthy's leadership. I mean, he couldn't get rid of Liz Cheney fast enough. He had to sort of leak some hot mic tape to make clear that that was his mission before he got back to Washington to actually do it. But this guy is still a member in good standing, Matt Gaetz. Last night, I'm not going to play it on this air, but I'll read what he said. He said, "We have a Second Amendment in this country, and I think we have an obligation to use it." To which Chris Krebs, who I believe you've worked with, he was the Homeland Security official in charge of making sure that 2020 was the most secure election in our country's history. He achieved that AIM and was fired by Donald Trump for doing so, also a lifelong Republican. He said this: "I avoid commenting on members of Congress and their inane remarks, but as a recent recipient of multiple death threats, this clear call to violence by a member of Congress is beyond the pale. It's disqualifying and un-American. If you associate with this, you're part of the problem." Kevin McCarthy is associated with this because we know he knows how to cut someone loose. He did it to Liz Cheney not 2 weeks ago. Why are Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene members in good standing and Liz Cheney is not?
Well, I certainly don't think they should be, and I think there may be people within the caucus who will start taking action on that. I said back early on in January, February, and then certainly as these investigations into Matt Gaetz, which were actually started by Donald Trump's Justice Department, as they went on, I said, why on earth is he on the Judiciary Committee? Why is he even in the caucus? I certainly think eventually Marjorie Greene, I think, will get kicked out of the caucus, but instead of doing it now, they'll drag it out and make it miserable. Just like the investigation, when things are going to inevitably happen anyway, you should just turn the page, get it done, and move on. And instead, they are dragging out this painful, ugly face of the party with the Gaetz Green grift tour that's going on now that is really not just, a clown car show, but it's a dangerous thing that they are doing. And they're continuing to spread disinformation. And we're ill-served to have them in the caucus. And I think more and more members will want them out. When you talk to people privately, they tell you what an embarrassment they are. Marjorie Greene's already attacking Kevin McCarthy, and I believe she already started attacking Elise Stefanik, the person that replaced Liz Cheney. So nobody is going to be odious enough for those two. And so they are a cancer on the party, just as Donald Trump has been, and that is why we need an independent outside investigation that looks at all of these things and gets it out of the political sphere. But as I was mentioning earlier, that doesn't mean, since in prior life I was chief counsel on a House committee where we did do investigations. And so when you get those documents and records themselves aren't political. It's going to be the interpretation and how they're tied together. So if you get them now, get that started, I think that will accelerate the acceptance ultimately, hopefully sooner rather than later, of an independent commission.
Congresswoman Barbara Comstock was very good at what she did, and that is a pathway that might be the thing that makes Republicans say, oh, we don't want that. I mean, do you think there's a way to call their... And part of me thinks that Democrats should just go for it.
Done this. Yeah, I wish they had done it back in January, because you remember in January, everybody was saying, let's have this independent commission. So it is unfortunate we've lost, that 5 months that we should have been jumping on it back then. But, still move forward, get records.
Congresswoman Dean, do you think that maybe Democrats sort of win by losing, if I will? And I only mean that in the spirit that Speaker Pelosi wanted this bipartisan commission so much that she conceded all of these, equal representation. Basically everything Kevin McCarthy wanted. Is it time to just do this with a Democrat, led? Obviously, it's still bipartisan. I mean, I think we should start correcting any Republican who says that that's not bipartisan. There were Democrats on the Benghazi committee. They had 33 hearings. I mean, it would still be a bipartisan committee in the House. Is that something that may yield a faster and better result if we can't get a bipartisan commission off the ground?
I'm not certain it'll yield a better one, because you know how poisoned it will be with toxic narratives. Right. Particularly coming from the side of the aisle. But failing an independent commission, we have to do it. We have an obligation to do it to protect our precious democracy. If we turn a blind eye on this, we actually risk losing our democracy, and I won't do that. So, yes, I'm certain that Speaker Pelosi will move forward. But you're absolutely right. I hope everyone notes the negotiations that took place between Benny Thompson and Representative Katko, and got to a place of absolute bipartisanship, an equal number of representatives, and they would be independent, not political, not electeds, and equal subpoena power, which is a critically important measure. I want to go back to the point of Mrs. Sicknick. Gladys Sicknick talked about her son and said, she boasted of his work ethic, that he was only there to serve our country. Republicans who denied this independent commission are the ones that speak very loudly that they're pro-police. They worry about liberal Democrats trying to defund the police. No, we're here to fund the police, to find out what happened, to find out exactly how these police officers, this protectionary force that I know now much better than I did before the insurrection and before impeachment, they are servants to us and to our country. How is it that the Republican Party does not want to protect those who protect us, does not want to find out the truth? And the reason they don't want to find out the truth is what it might expose about them.
We are left with no other rational conclusion to draw. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much. And former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, it is really a privilege to get to talk to both of you. Thank you for starting us off today.